Welcome to the Horizon Center School of Hypnotherapy, where we are committed to helping our students, graduates, and listeners be wildly successful in their practices. So, grab a pen and get ready to take notes while we talk about the 3 M's of a successful practice: mindset, mastery, and marketing. Now here's your host, clinical counseling hypnotherapist, Linda Campbell.
Have you ever finished a consultation with a client who has a complex backstory or a lot of goals or symptoms and thought, yikes, this is a lot of information. I have no idea where to begin. If so, then this episode is for you. In this episode, I'm going to be giving you 5 different ways to begin when you're working with a client who is complex or has a lot of symptoms going on. And so let's just jump right in. The first option is to look for common themes. Now, sometimes you're going to get a client who has all kinds of different goals that they want to work on, and you can't find anything in common between them. Maybe they've got a pain, and they have a fear of heights, and they want to quit biting their nails, and they want to improve their golf game. If you can't find any commonalities between them, I suggest that you ask the client to pick the goal that they're most excited about, the one that would have the biggest impact on their life, and start there. Oh, you're getting kind of a bonus one. That's not one of the 5. That's just a suggestion. Now, the reason for this is if we try to do too much in a session, it just kind of waters the session down. I used to use the analogy of, when my son was little, if I told him, brush your teeth, wash your face, get your jammies on, pick out a bear, pick out a book, and meet me in your bed, he'd probably do one of those things. If we try to give the subconscious way too much to do, it ends up not doing anything. And so if you can't find any commonalities between the symptoms or the goals that the client wants to work on, then again, pick the one or get the client to pick the one that's most important. And I'm going to give you a strategy for doing that in a moment, just in case you or the client can't figure it out. But if you can find some common themes between them, then you can address more than one goal at the same time. So sometimes it may look on the outside as though they're separate goals, but there's something that ties them together. So for example, if you have a client who wants to quit drinking, lose weight, quit procrastinating, and spend more time working on a business idea they have, it can sound like these are individual goals, but there's a common theme of living a better life or being more aligned with the person you want to be. If you can find something that ties the goals together, then you can work on that theme and then just address the separate symptoms as a part of that. So in hypnosis, it would sound a little something like this. In our consultation, you told me that you really wanted to live a more healthy and satisfying life, and that involves working on this business idea, being in a body you feel good about, and not drinking. And so we're going to do some work to help you shift all of those behaviors so that you can be the person that you really want to be. So sometimes there's really one goal, but it's showing up in several areas of the client's life. I'm not the person I want to be. I'm not doing the work I want to do. I'm not in the body I want to be in. I don't have the habits I'd like to have. And so again, in this case, you're looking for some commonalities between the goals. Are they all about having a healthier lifestyle? Are they all about being more aligned with your ideal self? Are they all about letting go of old habits that don't suit you anymore, updating them with more recent, current, healthier ones? What do they have in common? Now, the next approach is to look at whether there are any primary and secondary symptoms. I have a client who came to work with me to work on her anxiety, and she also let me know as kind of a side note that at some point she'd also like to work on her drinking. Now, she's using the drinking to manage her anxiety. So, the anxiety is the primary symptom, and the alcohol use is a secondary symptom. If it weren't for her anxiety, she probably wouldn't be using alcohol the way she is. She's using it to function better because the anxiety overtakes her. So I'm not really concerned about working on her drinking at this point, because if we can get the anxiety under control, and the drinking is just a coping mechanism to deal with the anxiety, then the drinking will probably start to shift on its own once the anxiety is down. Now, sometimes one of the symptoms is really a symptom of another symptom. If the drinking is really a symptom of the anxiety, then I want to start with the anxiety, and probably the drinking will take care of itself. If not, we can always work on the drinking afterwards when her anxiety starts to calm down. So I don't want to take away somebody's coping mechanism while they still need it, because they're just going to find another coping mechanism, or they're going to be resistant to letting it go in the first place. If I start my work with her on, let's get rid of your drinking, and now she's got this anxiety that's out of control because she's not doing anything to mitigate it, then she's probably going to hang on to the drinking to deal with the anxiety or go back to it. We're probably not going to get very far trying to get her to give up her drinking. I'm working on them in the wrong order. So there's this kind of domino effect going on. As a result of the anxiety, the client is using alcohol. And there could be symptoms of using alcohol as well, sort of tertiary symptoms, if that's the correct term. Maybe the client has guilt or shame, or they beat themselves up over their alcohol use. Now, if I started there, let's improve your self-talk, let's deal with the shame, without addressing the drinking or why the client is using the alcohol in the first place, the anxiety, again, I'm going in the wrong order. I'm starting with the wrong domino. If I start with the domino of anxiety and I clear the decks on that, we can reduce or eliminate the anxiety, help the client feel better, then they're going to be less likely to drink the way they have been, and therefore not have the guilt or the shame or beating themselves up that comes as a result of the drinking. Let me give you some more examples. Sometimes a client might be procrastinating because they have a fear of failure. If I work on that fear of failure, which is the primary symptom, the procrastination will take care of itself. The procrastination is a secondary symptom. It's a byproduct of the fear of failure. As long as I don't put any effort in, I can't fail. Another example would be a client who has had some sexual trauma who's hanging on to weight. The sexual trauma is the primary symptom. The weight is the secondary symptom. If I just try to take away her weight, which is a coping mechanism, a way to feel as though she's not going to attract unwanted attention, but I haven't worked on the trauma, she could be resistant to letting go of the weight. And so that's approach number 2, sort through the symptoms. Figure out which are secondary and which are primary and begin with the primary symptoms. Trust that as you work on the primary symptoms, the secondary symptoms will begin to alleviate, and if not, you can work on them after you've worked on the first one. Now, the third approach is to use the client's subconscious to help you get clarity as to where to begin. So this approach works whether the client has several goals or there could be several contributing factors that cause a client to have a particular symptom, and you're not sure which factor to start with. So let me give you an example of each. The client with several goals is easy. This is the client who comes in and says, I want to quit biting my nails, I want to deal with my depression, I want to improve my golf game, and I want to work on my communication style. Now, let me give you an example of a client who has several contributing factors. This could be the case with a client who has anxiety. Maybe they grew up in a chaotic environment. They had a parent who was an alcoholic. They had another parent who was anxious, so they saw anxiety being modeled growing up. In this case, there could be a few reasons why the client has anxiety. It could be a result of the environment they were in. It could be a result of the modeling they received. And if you're not sure exactly where to begin, then this approach will help with that client. So this approach helps you to sort through all of the information the client is giving you so that you know where to begin. It's a script that I've written that I call choosing from more than one goal. Now, I'll explain how that approach works. So what you do with this technique is in hypnosis, you get the client to give you a number between 0 and 10 for how important it is for us to work on whatever the thing is at this time. And it's not ranking them. It's not like there's going to be a 1 and a 2 and a 3. It's really just getting the subconscious to tell us how important each thing is. You could have all 3s or 5 10s or maybe no 10s. So once they're in hypnosis, I'm going to say something to the effect of, when you came to work with me during the consultation, you mentioned that there were 4 different things you wanted to work on. During our conversation, it was unclear as to where we should begin. So I'm going to ask your subconscious to give us some feedback to inform our direction. In a moment, I'm going to list off the topics that we came up with, and I'm going to have you, without thinking, just say aloud a number between 0 and 10. 0 means not important at all for us to work on. 10 means crucially important. And of course, it could fall anywhere in between. So just let the number come out. The first thing was your golf game, 0. The next thing was your anxiety. The client says 10. The third was your nail biting, 3. So you're essentially just getting the subconscious to place them for you in order of importance. Now, if you're looking at different contributing factors for a particular symptom, you could also do the same thing. When we talked during the consultation about the different factors that could be contributing to your anxiety, you mentioned several things. You mentioned growing up in a chaotic environment, you mentioned having an alcoholic parent, and you mentioned that your mother was also anxious and you would have seen a lot of that modeled by her. Now, in a moment, I'm going to list these things off once again. And what I want you to do is give me a number for each one. Just say it out loud, the first number that comes to mind without any thinking. Give me a number between 0 and 10. 0 means it is not a factor at all. 10 means it is a crucial factor. It must be addressed. Now, I also want to add in here that you should mention that if there's anything else that's important for you to work on, that's going to come to mind as well. What if the client gave you information during the consultation that is not the most important thing that has caused their symptoms? Maybe the things that they told you are only what they think caused their symptoms, but they're way off. So it's kind of a throw me a bone approach. Do we need to work on this, or this? Or is there something else that's even more important? And so again, ultimately the subconscious knows what direction we need to go in. So if you or the client are unclear, you can turn it over to their subconscious to figure it out for you. So that's approach number 3, get their subconscious involved. Now, in order to explain the fourth option for how to know where to begin with your client, I need to back up and explain how I teach my students. I use a cognitive behavioral therapy approach where I have my clients create a chart based on the information that they gather from their clients during the consultation. I call this the ABC chart. The approach I take is that there are events in our lives that cause us to form beliefs, and because of the beliefs, we develop symptoms. And when we lay out the events, beliefs, and symptoms or consequences of that event in a linear fashion, it's easier to see how an event has caused a particular belief or how a belief has caused a particular symptom. So the first column in the chart is the A column. The A stands for activating event. This is any event that occurred that causes a client's symptom. So for example, if a client grows up in a family with a critical parent or an environment that is unsafe, that is the activating event. Now, the event could be a one-time thing. You have a car accident. Now you have a fear of driving. Or it could be an ongoing thing, like an environment of growing up with an unsafe or critical parent. So that's the A column. Any events that have had an impact on your client. Now, the B column is the belief that developed as a result of the particular event in the A column. If you grew up with a critical parent, you may have a belief that you are unworthy or unlovable. That's what's going to show up in the B column. If you grew up in a chaotic environment, you might have a belief, I'm not safe. Now, the C column is the consequence column. This is where you're going to list off any symptoms that the client has as a result of that event or that belief. So for example, again, if the client grew up in a threatening environment, that could lead to a belief that I'm unsafe or unworthy, and there could be all kinds of symptoms that could show up in the C column as a result. Low self-esteem, negative self-talk, not being able to assert oneself, doubting oneself, hypervigilance, not sleeping well, overactive startle response. There could be all kinds of things going on in the C column. So I recommend to my students that after they do their intake with the client, they organize all of the notes chronologically in this ABC chart so they can see what led to what. What were the significant events in that client's life that led them to have particular beliefs or particular symptoms? It makes it easier to strategize for your client. It makes it easier to see what's going on for the client, and it helps demystify things for the client a bit. The client often comes in focused on all of the things in the C column. They're focused on all of their symptoms. When we can point out that those symptoms all stem to one particular event or environment, it gives the client hope. They realize that by addressing that one event, all of those symptoms will start to change. It helps them to understand that maybe they're more helpable than they thought they were. And so this is the next suggestion as to where to begin with the client. If you look at the ABC chart and you can see that one event has led to a variety of symptoms the client has, that could be a good place to begin. By addressing that particular event, because of its impact on the client, the results should be noticeable. So if you're confused because the client seems to have a lot of symptoms, they have negative self-talk, they're hypervigilant, they're biting their nails, they have low self-worth, they don't go after what it is they want. But you can recognize that all of those things are a byproduct of growing up with a threatening parent, growing up feeling unsafe, having somebody in your environment who is critical, then that's what we want to work on. That session is going to be about helping the subconscious to understand that that situation, that environment is behind them, that they are safe, that they are lovable. If there are symptoms that come from a belief of being unsafe, and we can convince the subconscious that the client is safe now, all of the symptoms begin to shift on their own. If the client has symptoms that stem back to having a critical parent, thereby having a resulting belief that they are unworthy, and we can convince the subconscious that they are worthy, that they are lovable, that they do have value, then all of the symptoms that were linked to the earlier beliefs start to shift. And so doing the ABC chart is really useful because it helps you to see all of the things that relate to one another. It helps you to kind of weed through the big shopping list of symptoms the client has and see what they're really dealing with. You're able to see which symptoms are a product of which events, where you need to begin. If I can change that one belief, all of the symptoms related to it change as well. Now, my fifth approach would be to start at the beginning. If the client has a really complex backstory and we have all of their information listed chronologically in the ABC chart, then starting at the very first event that had an impact on them with regards to their symptoms could be a good strategy. Sometimes the first event creates a particular belief within the client, and then the other events just reinforce that same belief over and over and over. If you have an original event, for example, that causes you to believe something about yourself, it's really easy to default to that way of thinking the next time another event occurs. Like if you grew up with a parent who told you, "I wish you'd never been born," and you took that to mean, "I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I don't deserve to be here," then when you have a teacher who tells you you're, doing bad in math, or put your hand down and give somebody else a chance, it's going to be really easy to default to thinking that the teacher treated you that way because you're not lovable, you're not worthy, instead of going, "Oh, maybe the teacher just wants to give somebody else a chance." If your first boyfriend cheats on you, it's going to be really easy to default to, "It's because I'm not lovable, it's because I'm not worthy," because that belief has already been established, instead of thinking, "Oh, he's 14, maybe 14-year-old boys just tend not to commit long term. It's not because of my lack of value or lack of worth, it's because of this situation." Now, having that belief in place makes it easier to kind of interpret everything else that happens through that particular lens. So once we change the belief, once the client understands that their critical parent was critical because of what was going on within them, not because of some fault or flaw within you, when we can change that belief that "I'm unworthy" to "I'm perfectly fine," then it kind of collapses the impact of all of the events that came afterwards. Because if I was fine right from the beginning, then I'm no longer interpreting the other events through that lens of "I'm not enough." And so the fifth approach is start at the beginning. Do the chronological chart of the client's ABCs, see what shows up at the very beginning, what is the first event that's had an impact on them in terms of their symptoms, and work on resolving the impact of that event. I hope this has given you some good ideas as to where to begin with a client. Please come back next week for another episode. Take care and have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening. Remember to check out the Horizon Center School of Hypnotherapy.com for courses, products, and to take advantage of the free test drive of the hypnotherapy certification training.